What's up, boss? This is Abraham's wallet. We span the gap between the austerity of obedience to God and the prosperity rising from faithfulness. Run your home and your dough like a biblical boss.
We're here on a Sunday, Steve, which is not our normal rhythm.
No, it is not.
Because you've just returned from really the epicenter of the financial world.
Okay, I'll allow that comment. I was in New York City, Manhattan, the big city. Right. Yeah.
You even posted some pictures to our Volley channel of you in front of the NYSE.
Yeah, I don't know why. I thought if I had some of my financially interested friends with me right now, we would comment. So I thought I'll bring them along. Our Volley friends. I suppose if I was really responsible and very dialed in, I would have figured out some Instagramming opportunity, but I'm not. So I didn't do that.
That's right. I liked it. I liked seeing you in front of the stock exchange. So thanks for documenting the trip a little bit. You put up a lot of really good. I mean, today we're actually wrapping up Sukkot. And why don't you tell us a little teaser for the non-volleyers of what you saw in Manhattan related to Sukkot?
Well, I had told my family on the way out there, if we want to go whole hog, that's a pork joke. If we wanted to go whole hog, we could have gone into Brooklyn and been inundated by a Jewish community. We didn't. We mostly did just touristy things. It was my daughter's first time, so we just did tour bus and stuff like that. And just walking around, the Jews were in high alert mode, trying to find people on street corners. They would walk around with the lulav, and they would try to accost you on the sidewalk and go, "Are you Jewish? And if so, we want you to participate in the blessing of Sukkot." And the dialogue always went the same way, with me going, "No, I'm not Jewish. I love the Torah, Baruch Hashem." And they're always a little bit, "Oh, that's nice, but what?" And we also saw sukkahs that were just crammed onto the sidewalk, just in the middle of Midtown Manhattan. And we also saw, the funniest thing we saw was there was a U-Haul truck that was driving around, and it said, "This is the Sukkah Mobile," and they had built with 2x4s onto the back of it a teeny little sukkah, so that, I guess you could squeeze in there, get a little blessing, get a little prayer or something, and then be on your way. But they were in high alert.
That's cool. Yeah, we had the pleasure of a week of Sukkot here. My wife said to me this morning, she said, "I'm ready for salad and healthy food for the next month," because we went for it with Sukkot. There was, the smoker was active. There was all sorts of things, and rich foods for sure.
Yeah.
So we're all feeling a little bit squishy.
Drunk.
Yeah, following Sukkot. I like how, if you make a brisket and then you leave it in the fridge for a while, all that delicious juice turns into a white paste.
Yes.
And I think that is now what is flowing through my veins.
Yes.
Which can't be that good, but
yes.
So we wrapped up Sukkot. I meant to ask you this offline, but I'm going to just air our dirty laundry for the people. Do we have our fantasy draft tonight?
Yes. The fantasy draft is tonight. The NBA fantasy draft.
Okay. And then yesterday, I have never been a sit on the couch and watch football on the weekends type of guy.
Yeah.
But I was at your house in Cincinnati a week ago, and we watched football it was mostly in the evening on a Saturday night, and we watched the Aggies come within 1 yard of beating
A
Alabama.
hair's breadth, yes.
And I'll say it was really fun to watch that game, and so last night we watched Tennessee get the job done in a
Wow.
pretty exciting fourth quarter. So I I don't think that our family is going to suddenly become a college football that's our weekend plans, but once in a while it's pretty fun to tune into
Well,
the college kids.
you happened upon a wing dinger of a game there
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
with the right outcome as well. I
Right
told my wife
outcome.
I don't remember ever rooting for the Volunteers in my whole life, but boy, I'm behind them right now.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes against my nature to root against an orange team, but I had no problem with that also.
Yeah, and this quarterback from Alabama also seems like a Jesus lover, yeah?
Yes.
So I liked the way he conducted himself amidst loss or victory, and it was just all around good times. So
Very good.
fun sports weekend, but that's not what we're here to talk
Well,
about.
I have to throw, if we're talking sports real quick, I just have to throw in a shout out to my only remaining connection. I am aging out of anybody of any connection to professional sports. So my only remaining connection to Major League Baseball is I have a friend, Craig Stammen, who has a long time relief pitcher and has, by hook and by crook, had such a nice long career. He's still a reliever with the San Diego Padres, who overcame very long odds last night to advance into the championship series against the Phillies, and they beat the Dodgers. And I'm so proud of Craig's team and those upstart little Padres.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Is Craig the guy who got us an in with Mr. Cole Hamels back in the day?
I think Craig might have helped with that. Yeah, that's probably right.
Yeah, so if you're a baseball fan, go back to the blog and search Cole Hamels, and you can see the time Steven interviewed World Series MVP pitcher for
That's right.
Abraham's Wallet. That was before we had a podcast. What a shame we don't
It
have that
was. And
audio.
you want to know what's really a shame is that when I did that interview with Cole Hamels, I recorded a phone call between us that was 90 minutes or something like that. Then I got, there was an app that would transcribe the phone call into text, and then I edited the text down and then put that up as a blog, and then promptly deleted all of the recordings of the phone call. So it would be great if we could retrospectively throw up an interview with Cole Hamels, but that doesn't exist.
That's okay. Maybe it's for the better.
Yeah.
We're not here to talk sports today. We might have some hot sports opinions,
Yeah, that's right.
but we're not here to talk about college football or the Padres. I don't know, Steven, have you been hearing that there's some turmoil in the markets lately?
Well, the good news that I've heard, and I keep hearing this over and over and over, is that there's no inflation. So I take a lot of comfort from hearing that news. Besides that, I mean, the word on the street is disconcerting. People are concerned about their mortgage rates. People are concerned about the markets. Yeah, sure. But I take comfort in knowing that there's no inflation, so I don't worry about it that much.
Yeah, markets are roiled. That's one of my favorite words that the news will use to describe what's happening is the markets are roiled right now. But you're right. We have been assured by the White House press secretary that inflation is not high and that gas has always been at this price.
Apparently, under no circumstances could inflation ever happen. So, I mean, that you can take some comfort in that it seems to be an impossibility. It seems like
we're going to talk about how to read the headlines today. And
okay.
One of the headlines I saw just as we were getting ready to do this was that there's a new program to subsidize weatherproofing work on houses, and that this is going to bring down inflation next year. So Usually, I'll just tell you, subsidies do not lower prices.
Oh boy, subsidies.
Before we dive into that, though, since you bring up inflation, we did get a question on the YouTube channel that's worth answering here. And people have been just sort of buzzing about these iBonds that we talked about. I don't
Yes.
know, it's probably 6 to 9 months ago now. We talked about iBonds, which are treasury bonds whose coupon rate is reflective of the rate of inflation. So if inflation is really high, they pay more. If inflation is very low, they pay less. Historically, iBonds would pay a base coupon rate plus inflation. But because inflation has been so high, the last few rounds of iBonds have paid a base rate of 0. So they're really just paying inflation. And people have been asking, hey, we keep hearing about inflation in the news. Should we be buying iBonds? Is that advice changed at all? What's the word? So I thought
Yeah. What do you say?
we'd talk about that. Right now, an iBond, the rate on an iBond is 9.62%. That's pretty darn good for what we consider a risk-free investment. So in order for that not to get paid, the US government has to default on its debt. That would be a whole different bag of cats, and we would need to stop worrying about how to invest your retirement portfolio and think about where to get more bullets. So,
I thought you were going to say bread, but bullets works.
yeah, that's, some people have buckets of silver coins buried in their backyard. Other people, maybe myself, thinks that bullets will be a little bit more valuable of a trading currency should that come to pass. But it's really a risk-free investment. We're pretty confident that the government's going to pay out on treasury bonds. Now, they might continue to inflate money so that it's worth less and less in order to pay, but they're generally going to pay. Believe it or not, even though inflation remains super high, the rate is going to be coming down. So inflation rate has dropped. The rate that will be, what happens is every 6 months, these things re-index. So after this month, October 22, the rate's going to drop to about 6.48%. So that's a pretty big drop, 3% points lower. However, still a good rate. And we talked about this when we first recommended iBonds, is that, even if you only hold these things for a year, one of the penalties if you take money out, let's say you hold it for exactly a year and then take money out, the penalty you pay is the last 3 months or 1/4 of interest they keep. You don't get that. So at 9+%, we're totally fine with that, because the comparable rate that you can get right now is about 3% in a savings account. So 9% minus a quarter, we're still doing real well. That's still true at 6.5%. However, our hope is that these things pay 0 before too long, or very, very low rates of return if inflation is able to get under control. I've never thought of these as a 7-year investment. I've always thought of them as, well, if you have a little bit of spare change and it's not your emergency fund, because remember, once you put it in, you cannot get it out for
Locked
a
up.
full year. So that's not good for an emergency fund. But let's say you've got your emergency fund, you've been funding other accounts, retirement, maybe you bought a rental house, whatever you're doing kind of with your investment plan, and you have a little extra money that you're not going to need for a year, but you might need in 3 years. That's a pretty good idea to do something with that money, put it in iBonds. You're limited to being able to buy $10,000 worth for you. So if you're married, you can buy $10,000 for your spouse. If you have a business, the business can buy $10,000. So our business owns $10,000 worth of iBonds right now. But you can also buy for your kids. There's some pitfalls there. Namely, it has to be in your kid's name. You can't just buy them for your kids and then use that money to renovate a bathroom in a couple years. That would be breaking the law. Don't do it. So generally, I don't recommend these for investments for kids, but I think there's still a good move right now. I think that advice might change in 6 months. So let's say by some miracle we get inflation under control over the next 6 months and that rate drops to 4%. Then we're starting to say like, I'd rather probably have the 3% and I can get to it anytime I want than a 4% where I'm going to lose a quarter's worth of interest when I take it out anyways. So
But
that's
at 9,
at 9. It feels like it's a pretty safe bet.
yeah.
So that's my update on iBonds.
All right. Thanks for chiming in with the YouTube audience. I'll just throw in, because it's been quite a while since we actually talked. We've been airing a lot of episodes that were like pre-recorded, and so for people who are looking at us on YouTube, I have an updated background. It's not cinder blocks, so that's good. And I'm hoping that for people on just listening to the audio podcast, that you hear an enriched microphone experience as well. And I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to those people who have been donating to Abraham's Wallet, which has allowed us these kind of upgrades, with more on the way. So I'm just here to say thank you to those people, and better stuff is coming. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I have noticed the deep baritones in your voice today.
Good.
And it's true that our YouTube audience is ticking up a little bit. So I don't know if we're getting new people or if we're having some people switch over because they want to see the background. Give us just a little, for the audio listeners, maybe it'll tease them over to YouTube.
Yeah.
Maybe describe one item that is on that shelf behind you of novelties.
Okay. I won't go too deep into this, but for instance, this hat, which I'm indicated with the upraised pin, which is, by the way, Bethlehem olive tree. Just throwing that in. That hat, that is a family style hat that my grandfather used to wear, a cowboy hat like this. It's what ranchers wore to town when they were doing banking and business. My uncle wears a hat exactly like that, that's more bone colored, and I got a darker hat like that to attend my uncle's funeral, different uncle. And my uncle who wears that hat was wearing his hat and was very pleased to see me wearing that hat. So that is the family cowboy hat style. I don't know if you can see it well.
Yeah, it's visible. I thought it was more of an Indiana Jones hat.
But I'll just throw in right there. There's something that I learned when I was having this hat made. The crease, we're kind of familiar with the sort of side creases for a cowboy hat, but there's a front crease that you can get as well. And that front crease is called the Fort Worth crease. And the hat maker that works near where my parents live in Houston said, yeah, you got to have the Fort Worth crease. So I said, let's do it. So there it is. There's the family hat.
Love it. Well, there's more trinkets and
doodads
back there. I want to hear about the pig at some point.
Okay.
We had tried to record this episode about a week ago and ran into technical difficulties, and you were going to tell the story of the pig, but might have to wait till a future episode.
Sure.
Today's headline for the podcast is how to read the headlines. So my goal was really to come and talk through with our people, because we've already mentioned the markets are roiled, and when the markets are roiled, there's lots of headlines, and I want to just provide some guardrails for you if you're maybe you like to read the news, or your iPhone tells you here's some news things you should be aware of. Maybe you don't, and you just sit around the water cooler and somebody says, well, did you hear about such and such? I want you to have some guidance around how do I interpret the things that are being thrown out there. Should I be worried? Should I blow them all off? Is there anything that would be helpful to me as a family leader to kind of know about when it comes to specifically financial news in the middle of a difficult market environment? So that's what we're going to try to do today.
Do you do the Apple News? Do you let your phone interrupt you with news headlines?
interrupt me. No, I mean there's a little thing that if I scroll to one side all the way on my phone, it tells me some news stories. And I
But it
always
doesn't like flash them up like
no,
along
no,
with
no.
your text messages.
No.
Well,
Does
my
yours?
phone tried to do that to me. I don't know. You remember when Apple foisted a U2 album on all of us and said
Yes.
you'll have this and you'll enjoy it?
Did you?
No, I was pretty disappointed with that record.
Yeah.
But they tried to do this with their news service and they foist it upon you. And as soon as I could figure out how do I swipe this thing away? I don't want any of the news that the Apple brand corporation would want me to look at. And I just immediately unplugged that ASAP. That's how I feel about evening news. Anyways,
You
editorial.
were roiled by the foisting.
Correct. It roiled me.
Yeah. Well, I like to look at the Apple News to say, what do they think I'm interested in? And is
Right.
there any life changes I need to make based on the fact that, if I start getting ads for Kim Kardashian, such and such, then I go, what have I looked at on the internet that would suggest that this might be interesting to me?
Yes.
And try to change my life accordingly. But no, I look at, I mean, it's hard because everything is so personalized now. Any website you go to, they're trying to present what they think you're most interested in based on
yes.
behaviors. And so I try to look at a variety of different sites to get my financial news. I listen to podcasts pretty much every morning. I have about a 20-minute podcast roll that I'll just play through that gives me just the facts and numbers about what's happening in markets.
What do you recommend on that front?
The podcast I listen to, I like the Schwab Market Update audio, which is about 15 to 20 minutes of at the open and close of every market day. It gives you just the headlines. And honestly, you can listen to the first 5 minutes of that and get all the news that you need when it comes to markets. I like a podcast called Marketplace Morning Report, which they just do little blurbs throughout the day when there's news. Usually they're 3 or 4 minutes each. And I'll listen to those all at once. Those are probably my two when it comes to financial news audio sources. And then I'll go to Google Finance. If I want to know what's happening and it's not tailored to me, I'll open an incognito window and go to Google Finance and just see what are the top headlines if they know nothing about you. But those are my most common sources. And then I have a bunch of Twitter follows that I'll look at news from, and Market Watch and some other sites.
Dave Ramsey?
Don't listen to Dave Ramsey.
Okay.
You know who Jim Cramer is, right?
I do.
There was a big funny news story this week because they just started an ETF, an exchange traded fund, that the whole fund is called the Reverse Cramer. And they do exactly the opposite of what he recommends. And so far, it's performing well.
That's great.
So that kind of gets into some of what we're going to talk about, which is with headlines. This is no longer your grandpa's news headlines where there was a kid on the street corner shouting the news, the big story of the day, and then you paid 5 cents, got the paper, and you just read the news.
Right.
Now, news is monetized based on if you will click stories that tend to be scattered throughout whatever else you're doing, whether that's apps or websites or whatever. And so headlines have gotten more and more less and less geared towards let me provide you some information on what the story is about, and more, can I get you to click this?
Right.
And that has had a huge impact. And it's why I even felt like we needed to do this episode, because in the middle of a market downturn, things have been going down pretty steadily, but there's been huge up days and down days. And it's very easy for financial news sources to produce fantastic headlines that make you go, oh, I guess I need to click that. Things like, will you run out of money now that the S&P has hit a new low? Or, you can just tell in the way that it's phrased that there's an agenda, and that is to get you to click, not to inform you
Right.
of what's happening in the world. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yes. I would say there's distrust that has kind of swept over anybody who's paying attention. I suppose people are out there who you just think, oh, this is what news looks like now. But I guess for maybe older people, you just go like, oh, this is no longer, we're trying to, this is like Walter Cronkite just informing you this happened today. You might want to be aware of it because it's going to change the world. That's not where, like, Yahoo Financial News is so jaded, and it is so manipulative in its attempts to get your eyeballs, that the thing that kills me is when you see any news, financial news included, where they act like there's a news story. You go to open it up and you find it's a report on what 3 people tweeted, and this is the news story. And so you just go, wait, are there journalists back there somewhere? Is there somebody that's actually collecting information that can deliver it to me? You would think that somewhere out there, there's going to be a news site that's going to emerge that's going to be like generic, black and white. Here's the story, and you can pay us and we'll just tell you what happened today with no spin. Because it seems like what the reaction to what I'm describing has been people who are spinning it the opposite way. And they want to they would like look at what the Fed's doing and use that to kind of say what a terrible administration this is or something. We just, for me, there's almost zero trust in anybody giving me just the straight skinny on what's actually happening out there. So I think that's what you're reacting to when you say, let's talk about how to read these headlines. And I think it's very needed.
Yeah. And I guess for myself, I gave up trust in the maybe political or cultural news being unbiased fact reporting a long time ago. It was a little bit more difficult for me to see through the fact that had happened to the financial news, because so much of it is numbers. And I thought, well, these are just the numbers. This is what's happening.
That's fair.
So for example, we pulled some headlines, and here's one. It said the S&P 500 closes at new 2022 low as Apple helms broad market sell-off. This is definitely got some real news in it. So I think if I just read that, I would surmise, okay, the market is down, the S&P 500 is down, and Apple, maybe something happened that made Apple tank. So when you click into that story, you find out Apple was down about 5%, and the S&P 500 was down about 2.1%. So in order to even understand this, I think the average person needs to know a few things. So what is the S&P 500? You've heard that story a bunch, or that name. People will say, well, the S&P is up or down, or they might say the Dow is up or down. So the S&P 500 is an index. It's a market capitalization weighted index of the 500 leading publicly traded companies in the US. Market capitalization means the more they're worth, the more of that index they comprise. And it's interesting if you know that, because you would understand a little more about this headline. Apple is actually 7.1% of the S&P 500. So one company makes up a giant percentage, 7.1% of the index, which has 500 companies in it. The Dow, just since we're talking about indexes, is a price-weighted index that tracks 30 large publicly owned companies that trade on the place that you were visiting, the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. So price-weighted means it's actually weighted based on the stock price. So the stock price does not have anything to do with the market cap or the value of the company. You have to know how many shares are out to get the market cap. But if you've got a company that's got $100 stock price and another company that has a $50 stock price, and they're both in the Dow, the $100 will be a bigger percentage of that index than the $50 company, even if the $50 company has 20 times as many shares and is worth more money.
All right.
So that's just how to kind of understand indexes, because they tend to be at the center of a lot of these headlines. why did the S&P 500 sell off? Why did Apple lead it lower? And when you read in the article, you find out Apple got downgraded by an equity analyst. So publicly traded companies, there are people at investment banks, I used to do this work, that research the companies and they build models that go way out into the future for how much that company's going to make. And if something changes in their model, then they'll change some numbers and it'll change the present value today based on their expectations for the future. Having kind of worked in that world, I'll tell you, it's hard to get excited about an equity analyst that has a 20-year model for a company because they're always completely wrong, like 2 years into the future. But when a big important equity analyst at, say, Goldman Sachs downgrades a company like Apple, it tends to have an impact. People get scared. Some of them might be investors at big pension funds that have rules that say, hey, if enough analysts downgrade the stock, then we sell it. And there's not a opinion behind that. It's just, that's our rule. That's how we manage our assets. I think when you're looking at headlines, you'll also look for terms like market sell-off or 2022 low. And those are terms that are meant to get your attention. Market sell-off, like that sounds like my images from the 30s when the Great Depression was having everybody ran to the banks and, Black Tuesday and all that stuff.
Right.
So was there a market sell-off down 2.1%? I don't know. That was people were trading stocks for less money than they were the day before. But does that sound like a collapse of the stock exchange? Not really. They're definitely trying to make me click this. And that headline is about as factual as they come. So I started with one that is really pretty vanilla. It's not super fantastic. But even that one, they're still trying kind of sneak in some things. Maybe we can make you afraid of what's going to happen in the market. So look for those terms when you read headlines. And then if it piques your interest, maybe you own a bunch of Apple stock and you want to know what's happened. Click into it, figure out what happened. Oh, an analyst downgraded it. Personally, I would say that could be discounted a lot in terms of did anything actually change? Now, if Apple came out and said, it turns out we're getting kicked out of manufacturing everything in China and we have to that could actually impact the company. So you might want to know that as an investor. But if it's usually a lot of these things are somebody gets some information and puts out an opinion and they try to market it because that makes them more credible as an analyst. And in some sense, the desire of the equity analyst is that the stock price would go down when they downgrade the company because it is a proof of their influence and credibility in that company.
I think it's a wonderful point. This is sort of watching media 101, but just understand that fear is a driving motivation to get you to do all sorts of things. That's why they say, is there poison in the toothpaste that you're using? Watch tonight at 11. Are your children safe? Be sure to watch tonight, because fear is so motivating. So it's just good for people to know that if you can smell fear tainting any headline that you're looking at, always just immediately let that set up a red flag. This might not be true. It might just be there to get me to click on this. And I'll just say that fear fear triggers adrenaline in us, and you can actually become addicted to responding to things based on fear. And you don't want to do that. That's not good for your soul. It's not good for your body. We should avoid things that make us more anxious and don't opt into fear. So just our 2 cents is, when you're looking at financial headlines that are trying to press a button in you to make you be anxious and fearful so that, just jump at it, you're already in a bad state of mind when you go to it. So we would encourage you to tread very lightly on things that sound like the sky is falling. If the sky is falling, we'll tell you, and
Yeah.
we won't do it in a way that makes you go crazy.
Yeah. So I want to move on to a couple other headlines. I saw these two headlines on the same front page of a financial news site. So right next to each other. One says analysts foresee 12% rise in stock market over the next 12 months. So that sounds great. Um, the one right next to it says Wall Street experts warn stocks may fall even further. And to your point about fear, fear is even used when things are going great.
Yes.
Fear is, think about when stocks were just going crazy up in 2020. There was a lot of headlines like, will you miss out on a stable retirement if you don't invest now? So even when things are going well, they're still using fear to try to get you to get in, click, be, do I need to be worried? I don't have enough to invest right now. Maybe I'm doing something else financially and I don't have a ton of money to invest. Am I going to miss out? Same motivation there, but I just want to kind of illustrate the absurdity of two headlines that say the exact opposite thing. Now, of course, if we got very technical, stocks could fall even farther and rise 12% over the next 12 months.
Sure.
But the thing that's being pushed is really the opposite sentiment. One wants you to say, no, we've hit the bottom and we're going to turn around. And the other says, we're just getting started on the downhill. And to this, I don't have a lot of financial education stuff to convince you that one of them is right and here's how you can figure out which one is right. I think I would take you to a couple passages in scripture. The first one is James 4:13 through 17. And it says this: Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So whoever knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, for him it is sin. This is a really instructive passage for those of us who spend our time looking at markets and making recommendations about things like, where to trade and make a profit. And so I think that it's really important to just keep the words of scripture in mind as we read headlines like this that are somebody doing exactly what James mentions, which is that they're saying, we know what's going to happen in the future. They do not. That doesn't mean we should be foolish and just kind of live our lives. Hey, here's whatever happens. We're not going to prepare for it. But headlines are trying to sell you on a falsehood that we have figured out the future. And anytime you see analysts foresee rise, analysts foresee a fall. When I was working at the IMF, there was a guy who got very famous because I was there right before the stock market crash of 2008. And this Italian economist was hailed as a genius because he gave this rousing speech that I attended to all the top economists of the world, where he outlined exactly, this is going to crash, the markets are going to tank, we're in trouble. And everybody thought he was a genius. And then I looked back maybe a year into the crash once, we were like, wow, that guy was right. He had been giving the same speech for the last 7 years. So I don't know. That's one way to do it, is that you'll be a genius if you take a contrarian opinion and just put it out there until maybe it happens. But the point is, he didn't know any more than the next guy what was going to happen in a given year.
Yeah, a couple of points about your side-by-side headlines. One is that there can be appeals to fear, and there can also be appeals to greed. And if you feel either of those lurking in the shadows when you see a headline, you might just tap the brakes and just go, hold on a second. What are they trying to what are they trying to do here? I just happened to have heard from Gina Bontempo recently talking about how the journalism world has changed. And she cut her teeth. I think she went to Harvard, and she cut her teeth in big time journalism. And she just realized there was a point when the headlines were already written by the editorial managing editor, and he would just hand them off, just fill in the blanks with just write this story, because we know, testing tells us that we know that this headline will get us clicks. So just go figure out a story that supports this headline. And one thought that I have about your side-by-side headlines is that somebody is testing to see which of those headlines is going to garner more clicks, and they will double down on that when they get the answer to that question. So when you see two opposing financial headlines side by side, it's just like one of these little, which princess are you? And you're just clicking in to fill out their survey, basically. And they're just testing you to go, okay, great. We know that you like greed, so we will give you more greedy based headlines in the future. I think it helps us to be able to see through that motive coming from the side that's actually furnishing us the content.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm just sort of stuck on thinking about which princess you are. But
yeah, don't spend much mental energy on that.
Okay. The other passage that I think is worth just memorizing and reciting to yourself if you're going to dive into some news is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. And you heard this as a little kid in Sunday school, but man, it would do us all good to put this on the wall and behind our computer or wherever you're looking at the news. And it says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him and he will make straight your paths. And so whether it's fear or greed that you sort of can see through a headline and notice they're trying to tap into, both responses belie a lack of trust in the Lord to provide, whether that's to provide all the things you need for basic life, or even that he would be so good as to provide extra, that he would put you in charge of more resources. So I think that, when you find yourself falling into that fear or that greed trap, it's often an opportunity to identify and repent of a lack of trust in the Lord.
Great.
I want to talk about one other type of headline that I think gets skipped over a bit because this is me postulating, Stephen. You can tell me if you agree or not, but right. I think it's easier for news sites to be a little bit more objective about things that are happening abroad than things that are happening in the US. So the Ukraine thing has changed that a bit. But historically, if you wanted the news about American politics, you were better off going to the BBC than to CNN for an unbiased opinion. And when it comes to financial news, I found that there's actually a lot of good stuff to be learned by reading what's happening in financial news outside of the United States, because it tends to be a little bit less clickbaity, where they're not as they're not as much appealing to you worrying about your 401k when they're telling you what happened in Asian markets as when they tell you, the S&P is headed for all-time lows. That is a little bit more fear-inducing for the average American.
Yeah.
When I was preparing just now, I went to Google Finance, and one of the 20 headlines there was here's how much the average American 60-year-old holds in retirement savings. How does your nest egg compare?
Mm-hmm.
That is not a helpful story to read, because you're going to click it and you're going to go, the average American 60-year-old holds $110,000 in retirement savings. So I'm doing fine because I have 0 and I'm 40. So I've got 20 years and I can get to 110. That's not that hard. That story is definitely encouraging spending, even though they, on the surface, are trying to say, compare yourself and make sure you're on track. Well, it doesn't say here's how much you need. It says here's how much the average person
The
has.
average.
And we know that the average person also goes bankrupt if their car breaks down.
The average person is not doing great
No. So
in many, many, many ways.
obviously, our whole economy is built on consumption. The shrewd among us can play that to our advantage, and we can even invest in companies that are making products that people want to buy without selling ourselves to the consumer mentality. But I'd say that, yeah, go look at most media. What pays for it? You know, the New York Times wants you to click on their articles because they might make $3 a month or whatever if you subscribe, but really where they're making their money is because there's ads all over the thing for
Yes.
you to buy things. So that's a good point. I think that the whole news system in the country, and this has probably always been the case, is built around consumption and ads.
Yes.
I have
So
some.
it's always a good thing to think to yourself when you enter the world of big time finance, whether it's TD Ameritrade, Northwestern Mutual, whether it's Yahoo Finance. When you step foot into that world, you should just be thinking to yourself, I'm not doing what they're selling. The road that they're describing is not what we Abrahamic multi-gen family builders are doing. So what we want to do is to equip you so that you can use some of these goods and services to accomplish what you want to accomplish, but we'll never be able to just sign our lives over to that system and go, you guys just tell me what to do. That will never be the right road for us to go down, which is why Mark wants to make you savvy as you're looking at headlines to go like, how do I use this? I don't want to just give myself to this headline and let it take me on a journey. I want to be able to interpret what's coming my way. And I just feel like that whole mindset thing is so important to remember. It's why we did an entire episode on responsibility, because there aren't any ads for responsibility. There's no incentives for Yahoo Finance to give you an article about here's why being responsible and taking ownership over your world is so beneficial. You're not going to see that. That's not happening. So forgive me for giving in a mid-episode advertisement for this episode, but that's what I hear.
Yeah. Okay, last headline I want to cover.
All right.
It's exciting. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Bank of England to buy 65 billion pounds of UK bonds.
Exciting. That is exciting.
So I think my point on this one is most of us would see that and go, not interested, next.
Irrelevant.
Because it doesn't have any of those triggers that we talked about. But if you clicked into this article, here's what you would learn. And you're going to learn some things in this article that will make you smarter than most people at the water cooler on some things that are happening in our country.
Okay.
And so, you might think this doesn't matter, but this news article ran on a day when the U.S. market gained more than 2%. So that was a big up day amidst a bunch of down days. So whatever's happening might have had an impact on global markets. And here's what happened. The British 30-year bond yields had hit their highest point since 2002, and traders had said it's becoming increasingly hard to buy and sell bonds because no one wants the risk of having such a volatile asset. We've talked about it before, but bond prices and yields move in different directions. So when interest rates go up, bond prices go down. And nobody wanted to hold bonds if they said, well, I'm getting a 4% return on a British bond, but it might be worth a whole lot less in 2 weeks if things keep kind of going up and down the way they are. So the British government was having a hard time funding operations through issuing bonds. At the same time, the British pound is weakening for a variety of reasons, but lately one of the main reasons has been there was a big plan announced by the government for tax cuts by the new prime minister. They were just going to cut taxes dramatically, and there's such a thing as unfunded and funded tax cuts. So unfunded is what this plan in the UK was, which meant they were just going to cut taxes and hope that things worked out. Basically, they weren't cutting spending at the same amount that they were cutting taxes. And the result of all this stew of events is that bond prices surged, which, remember, that's the opposite of what had been happening. They had been dropping because people wanted to buy them because the government was stepping in and saying, we are not going to let these things continue to drop in price. Now, what it actually means for you is a few things. One, what is happening in the United States with interest rates going up and up and up is not unique to the United States. It's happening across the world right now. And it's happening because everybody is fighting inflation. So when you hear people say, hey, the government, our government is doing X, Y, and Z, and that's why inflation is high. Our government is doing a lot of stupid things that's driving inflation. We are also one of all the other countries that is fighting really high inflation, some of whom are doing similar things to us and some of whom aren't. So when you read some of the stories about what's happening globally in finance, you can kind of say, hold your roll there a little bit. This isn't just a result of the XYZ Biden plan. There's a lot of factors going into what's happening in our country. The other thing that's happening with what's going on in the UK specifically, but really in all of Europe right now, is that the dollar is very strong. So that has a few implications. International investments are starting to look interesting because you can kind of buy them cheaply. I was hanging
Shekels.
out here. What's that?
You can buy shekels.
Yeah. Well, I was hanging out the other night with somebody who had been to Argentina recently, and I had stayed over there for almost a year when the US dollar had just gotten unpegged from the Argentine peso. And almost overnight, they had been pegged to the dollar. So 1 peso was equal to $1. And in Buenos Aires, it's a big city with all sorts of great stuff to eat and do and all that. And it was very expensive. So you'd go to a steakhouse and it'd be $55 for a steak. Overnight, they unpegged and it went to $1 equals 10 pesos, but
Wow.
the prices stayed the same. So I was there and I was living like a rock star. It's like $5.50 and I can have the best steak in the world.
Instantly rich.
Yeah. So I think I was talking to a buddy about this, and he had just been, and he said their inflation has gotten out of control recently, and $1 now equals 151 pesos.
Wow.
So it could always be worse. I know that we're excited about our iBonds and hoping that inflation comes down, but hopefully we don't hit that, roughly 1,000% inflation that other places in the world have been experiencing. But
Yep.
for me, the practical takeaway from this is we booked 2 weeks in Europe for next summer. So we're going to go,
Right.
we're going to go take advantage. And this is something, it's for a totally different episode, but you can actually, when you're thinking about travel dollars, you can sort of arbitrage what's happening in the world to take vacations that are way, way cheaper based
Right.
on where the dollar is strong at the moment.
Right.
So who knows what things will actually look like by next summer, but if it's still looking like it does now, I'm taking my kids to see some sites in Europe, and we'll probably have to pay a bunch for a plane ticket because oil is so expensive, but we might get to eat at a French cafe for half of what we normally would pay.
Kind of fun to think of financial news as informing your future travel and going wherever the dollar is strongest.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd be seen as an enemy when you get there, but your dollar would go a long way.
I think another place that you can get smoking deals right now is Kiev. Is it too soon for Ukraine jokes?
Probably.
Okay.
Yeah, probably so.
You can edit that out. On the whole, my hope for this episode was just that we would take a few headlines. Some of these are a little older. There's a lot happened in the UK since they published that headline. Namely, the government came out and said, well, we're not going to actually do all the tax cuts. And the pound has come back a little bit against the dollar. But my goal is that you would just have some context for when I'm reading headlines. I know, number one, they're not there to inform me of anything. They're there
That's
to get me
right.
to click stuff. And number two, here's a framework I can use to rely upon the Lord for my future and sift through the data in a way that benefits my family and my community, but not necessarily swallows hook, line, and sinker whatever is put out to me, because I go back to point number one and know their goal is to make me click stuff because I'm worried or afraid or greedy.
Well, for all of you listening, may you be innocent as doves and shrewd as snakes as you navigate this world and the media that comes across your monitor, including financial news. So thanks for the tips, Mark, and we'll see you next time.
Sounds good.